Hello there, Drew Hanish of Whiskey Lore. It is smoke time. Little whiskey tasting, jumping today into my favorite Scotch whiskey. I am actually going to say, I'm taking that down. I'm going through 150 bottles of whiskey doing these tastings, and I think I am at a point where I need to give everything a fair shake and allow an opportunity for an upset spoiler to take over the number one position. But it's going to be tough because this is a really, really good whiskey. But one thing that I want to say about this, and maybe you do this as well, I can't shake the first time I tasted this whiskey. And some of the reasons that I put it at number one and I don't let it slide from number one is because I remember that first taste and it just had such an impact on me that it's hard not to have it sit there at number one, even though I've tasted a whole bunch of different whiskeys since then. I just don't remember having the experience with other whiskeys that I had with this particular one. And so that's why it is really, really high up there in my heart. This is actually not the first one I tasted. The first one I tasted was batch 10, I think. And this is batch 11 from March of 19. So each of the batches do have some personality changes in them. They have different ABVs. This one is 58.6 ABV. And it's, so, I mean, results may vary. And maybe batch 11 isn't going to give me that same experience that I got out of batch 10. So maybe it isn't my favorite whiskey. Maybe batch 10 will always be my favorite whiskey and I'll never be able to challenge it because I don't have a bottle of it to do a challenge here. A little background on LAPHROAIG. We'll jump into a little history. Actually, before I do though, just a reminder that if you enjoy these videos to hit the like button, subscribe, and you're going to get more and more of these videos as we go along. I want to give you a little background on LAPHROAIG because it has, or about actually Islay, because it has a very interesting history. At the time that Islay came along, or that LAPHROAIG came along, and you'll see the date here, 1815, is when they say that the distillery was established. At that point, there were probably around 8,000 inhabitants on the island of Islay. And one man owned it. Walter Frederick Campbell was the owner. He had inherited it. And so when you think of all that great whiskey that comes from Islay, there was one man that owned that island at that time, and the Campbells had ruled that area for many, many a year. And the Campbells only finally ended up giving up control of the entire island in 1845, and this was around the time of the Great Irish Potato Famine, and there was a movement to move people off of Islay because it had become overpopulated, and some of it was people coming up from Ireland, and also just it had become a popular place, and so they basically started moving people off of the island to reduce population and replaced people with sheep. And so when you go to Islay now, you'll see that there's a lot of farming that's going on there, and all of the farming and the sheep and all of that really had started to get built up around 1845. LAPHROAIG itself had started out on a farm. It was land that Donald Johnston and his brother Alexander worked on and built this distillery. And at a certain point, Alexander went off to live his own life in Australia, and he let his brother Donald buy him out. And Donald loved the distillery, and he so had a passion for making the whiskey. As soon as he got control of the distillery, not long after, a tragedy happened, and you can hear this on Whiskey Lore. I think it's season 3, where I talk about Grace Gow and Donald Johnston. And as the story goes, at some point he slipped and fell into a pot of boiling pot ale. And that was the end of Donald Johnston. But his name lives on. If you ever see a barrel, you will see his name on it at LAPHROAIG, and it still says D. Johnston and Company on the bottles. So he left this world in a very, very horrible way, but his name lives on. And so all the different owners and everything else. What's interesting is that the most recent distillery manager at LAPHROAIG was John Campbell. Now he's gone off to Lochlia, that's in Ayrshire, right below Glasgow. And I do an interview with him. We've recorded it already, and it's going to be presented sometime around the U.S. release of Lochlia whiskey. So that's going to be like April, early May. But I didn't think to ask him, and I should have. Campbell, we say the Campbells owned Islay, and he is actually the only distillery manager in the 200 plus year history of LAPHROAIG who is actually someone who was born on Islay, believe it or not. And so I should have asked him if he knew whether he was part of the Campbell clan. Obviously, it's his last name. He retraces his roots. He's probably going to find a tie in there somewhere. But interesting, because he didn't really come down through generations to take over that job. He was actually a lobster fisherman as his first job, and then came in the ground floor at LAPHROAIG and worked his way up to running the place. It's a little strong on the nostrils. It will get you, but it has all of that character that you really expect out of LAPHROAIG. It's got that nice, you really can smell the sea in this. I mean, nose this, close your eyes, and you will think you're on a fishing boat. It just has that sea character, comes straight through this whiskey. Now, what I loved about the 2018 version, batch 10, was on the palate. It tasted like earth. It was the first whiskey that I felt like I was licking the ground. And I know that doesn't sound appealing probably, but if you've been to Islay and you've experienced Islay, it takes you right there. And it's fascinating. So I'm going to have to go on a boat off of Islay and get that sea being on the boat smell, because I have a feeling this would take me right back there. There's the bacon in there. There's a little bit of seaweedy character, but it's not as strong. Actually, the meatiness in this isn't quite as strong, and the smoke is a kind of a coal smoke almost to me. Really interesting. And there's actually a little leather note that I'm getting in there. Now, LAPHROAIG uses Maker's Mark barrels, and you may say, well, what does Maker's Mark really add to this whiskey? It's a wheated bourbon, and so what impact does it have on this? I think the impact it has is that it doesn't get in the way. It's a used barrel. Maker's Mark is a really nice whiskey, but it's not something that is overly challenging in certain areas in terms of it doesn't take over. It's not a whiskey that's going to take over. And if they used their other American partners' barrels, Jim Beam, which do tend to have, Jim Beam to me has a funk to it, an interesting funk. It would be fascinating to know what LAPHROAIG aged in a Jim Beam barrel would be like versus LAPHROAIG being aged in a Maker's Mark barrel. Beautiful nose on this. It's got somewhat of a medium mouthfeel. There's a nice sweetness of grain that comes in there. You do get the Isle of Turf. It's not as intense. There's a light licorice note in there that I'm picking up. Dark chocolate comes in. And then it also almost has this little saccharine flavor that I've never noticed before that seems to come in. The proof is warming my chest. Really nice warm smoke, grain, sweet, little lemon coming in on the finish. It is really nice. It's really nice. The thing is that this is my go-to in terms of a whiskey. But when I think of the wow factor that I get out of some other whiskeys, I don't know if this entirely has the same level of wow factor, because the mouthfeel on this is kind of a medium mouthfeel. It's not a milky kind of mouthfeel. And so I've had whiskeys that have had that milky mouthfeel, the nice velvety smoke that comes with them. This one's a little bit, it has a sweet component, but it's not as vibrant, I guess, would be a good way to put it. So this one is more your blue collar smoke versus some of those more velvety ones that might be a little bit more of a glossy kind of smoke that comes through. Does that make sense at all? Does that, and have you had a similar experience? Comments below and let me know what you think of LAPHROAIG's cask strength and whether you've had a really good batch of this and if you've noticed a difference in batches along the way. I love this whiskey. I think it's a very, very good whiskey. Amazingly though, after some of the other stuff that I have tasted, I'm tempered a little bit. And I'm actually going to say very good whiskey, very good whiskey. I don't know if it's my favorite anymore. We'll see, because as I'm going through 150 bottles, there's an opportunity for somebody to leap out in front and take the lead over this one. So, amazing. Did not think I'd ever say that. So anyway, until next time, cheers and Slainte.